The complete works of Swami Vivekananda. Karam Yoga, Chapter 2, The First Steps, Part 1. Raj Yoga is divided into 8 steps. The first is Yama, non-killing, truthfulness, non-stealing, countenance, and non-receiving of any gifts. Next is Niyama, cleanliness, contentment, austerity, study, and self-surrender to God. Then comes asana or posture, pranayama or control of the prana, pratyahara or restraint of the senses from their objects, dharana or fixing the mind on a spot, dhyana or meditation, and samadhi or super consciousness. The yama and the niyama, as we see, are moral trainings. Without these as the basis, no practice of yoga will succeed. As these two become established, the yogi will begin to realize the fruits of his practice. Without these, it will never bear fruit. A yogi must not think of injuring anyone by thought, word, or deed. Mercy shall not be for men alone, but shall go beyond and embrace the whole world. The next step is asana, posture. A series of exercises, physical and mental, is to be gone through every day until certain higher states are reached. Therefore, it is quite necessary that we should find a posture in which we can remain long. That posture, which is the easiest for one, should be the one chosen. For thinking, a certain posture may be very easy for one man, while to another it may be very difficult. We will find later on that during the study of these physiological matters, a good deal of activity goes on in the body. Nerve currents will have to be displaced and given a new channel. New sorts of vibrations will begin. The whole constitution will be remodeled, as it were. But the main part of the activity will lie along the spinal column, so that the one thing necessary for the posture is to hold the spinal column free, sitting erect, holding the three parts, the chest, the neck, and the head, in a straight line. Let the whole weight of the body be supported by the ribs, and then you have an easy natural posture with the spine straight. You will easily see that you cannot think very high thoughts with the chest in. This portion of the yoga is little similar to the Hatha Yoga, which deals entirely with the physical body, its aim being to make the physical body very strong. We have nothing to do with it here because its practices are very difficult and cannot be learnt in a day, and after all do not lead to much spiritual growth. Many of these practices you will find in Del Sarte and other teachers, such as placing the body in different physical postures, but the object in these is physical, not psychological. There is not one muscle in the body over which a man cannot establish a perfect control. The heart can be made to stop or to go on at his bidding, and each part of the organism can be similarly controlled. The result of this branch of yoga is to make men live long. Health is the chief idea, the one goal of the Hatha Yogi. He is determined not to fall sick, and he never does. He lives long. 100 years is nothing to him. He is quite young and fresh when he is 150, without one hair turning grey. But that is all. A banyan tree lives sometimes 5,000 years, but it is a banyan tree and nothing more. So, if a man lives long, he is only a healthy animal. One or two ordinary lessons of the Hatha Yogis are very useful. For instance, some of you will find it a good thing for headaches to drink cold water through the nose as soon as you get up in the morning. The whole day your brain will be nice and cool and you will never catch a cold. It is very easy to do. Put your nose into the water, draw it up through the nostrils and make a pump action in the throat. After one has learnt to have a firm erect seat, one has to perform according to certain schools a practice called the purifying of the nerves. This part has been rejected by some as not belonging to Raj Yoga, but as so great an authority as the commentator Shankaracharya advises it, I think fit that it should be mentioned, and I will quote his own directions from his commentary on the Shvetara Upanishad. The mind whose dross has been cleared away by the pranayam becomes fixed in Brahman. Therefore, pranayam is declared. First, the nerves are to be purified, then comes the power to practice pranayam. Stopping the right nostril with the thumb, through the left nostril fill in air according to the capacity, then without any interval throw the air out through the right nostril, closing the left one. Again, inhaling through the right nostril, eject through the left according to the capacity. Practice this 3 or 5 times at 4 hours of the day, before dawn, during midday, in the evening and at midnight. In 15 days or a month, purity of the nerves is attained. Then begins pranayam. Practice is absolutely necessary. You may sit down and listen to me by the hour every day, but if you do not practice, you will not get one step further. It all depends on practice. We never understand these things until we experience them. We will have to see and feel them for ourselves. Simply listening to explanations and theories will not do. There are several obstructions to practice. The first obstruction is an unhealthy body. If the body is not in a fit state, the practice will be obstructed. Therefore, we have to keep the body in good health. We have to take care of what we eat and drink and what we do. Always use a mental effort, what is usually called Christian Science, to keep the body strong. That is all. Nothing further of the body. We must not forget that health is only a means to an end. If health were the end, we would be like animals. Animals rarely become unhealthy. The second obstruction is doubt. We always feel doubtful about things we do not see. Man cannot live upon words, however he may try. So doubt comes to us as to whether there is any truth in these things or not. Even the best of us will doubt sometimes. With practice, within a few days a little glimpse will come through, enough to give one encouragement and hope. As a certain commentator on yoga philosophy says, when one proof is required, however little that may be, it will give us faith in the whole teaching of the yoga. For instance, after the first few months of practice, you will begin to find you can read another's thoughts. They will come to you in picture form. Perhaps you will hear something happening at a long distance when you concentrate your mind with a wish to hear. These glimpses will come by little bits at first, but enough to give you faith and strength and hope. For instance, if you concentrate your thoughts on the tip of your nose, in a few days you will begin to smell most beautiful fragrance, which will be enough to show you that there are certain mental perceptions that can be made obvious without the contact of physical objects. But we must always remember that these are only the means. The aim, the end, the goal of all this trading is liberation of the soul. Absolute control of nature and nothing short of it must be the goal. We must be the masters and not the slaves of nature. Neither body nor mind must be our master, nor must we forget that the body is mine and not I the body's. A god and a demon went to learn about a self from a great sage. They studied with him for a long time. At last the sage told them, "You yourselves are the being you are seeking." Both of them thought that their bodies were the self. They went back to their people quite satisfied and said, "We have learnt everything that there was to be learnt. Eat, drink, and be merry. We are the self. There is nothing beyond us." The nature of the demon was ignorant, clouded. So he never inquired any further, but was perfectly contented with the idea that he was God, that by the self was meant the body. The God had a purer nature. He at first committed the mistake of thinking, "I, this body, am Brahman. So keep it strong and in health and well dressed and give it all sorts of enjoyments." But in a few days he found out that that could not be the meaning of the sage, their master. There must be something higher. So he came back and said, "Sir, did you teach me that this body was the self? If so, I see all bodies die, the self cannot die." The sage said, "Find it out. Thou art that." Then the god thought that the vital forces which work the body were what the sage meant. And after a time he found that if he ate, these vital forces remained strong. But if he starved, they became weak. The god then went back to the sage and said, "Sir, do you mean that the vital forces are the self?" The sage said, "Find out for yourself. Thou art that." The god returned home once more, thinking that it was the mind, perhaps, that was the self. But in a short while he saw that there were so various, thoughts were so various, now good, again bad. The mind was too changeable to be the self. He went back to the sage and said, "Sir, I do not think that the mind is the self. Did you mean that?" "No," replied the sage. "Thou art that. Find out for yourself." The god went home and at last found that he was the self, beyond all thought, one without birth or death, whom the sword cannot pierce or the fire burn, whom the air cannot dry or the water melt, the beginless and endless, the immovable, the intangible, the omniscient, the omnipotent being, that it was neither the body nor the mind, but beyond them all. So he was satisfied. But the poor demon did not get the truth, owing to the fondness of his body.